Hi, I'm John Rosenwald, and my book, The Sonnets to Orpheus, a translation from Rainer Maria Rilke, won the award in the Excellence in Publishing category. Rainer Maria Rilke, without any question, the best known and the best German language poetry of the 20th century, um, lived through what we lived through from 1918 when what's called the Spanish flu epidemic hit and World War I. He could not write. He wrote stuff, but he didn't do what he wanted to do. He had begun in 1910, 1912, a series of long poems, which will eventually be called the Duino Elegies, Duinese Elegien, and he couldn't finish them. He had three or four, depending on how you count, finished, and then he stopped. And the war was over. He had served time as an older person, mandatory. He was not a German citizen. He was born in what then was the Austrian Republic, and he couldn't get to it. So then he found a small, with a female friend. They were walking downtown in Switzerland. He could get out of Germany, which was not easy because he was not a German citizen after the war. He was invited to Switzerland to do some readings, and he managed to make it there. And they found a small castle, though that's a misnomer. It had no water, it had no electricity, a three-floor building. They hired a woman to cook for him and keep it clean. And then on the 2nd of February, 1922, so just 100 years ago, this is one reason why the book is out this year. He woke up on that morning and he said he didn't write these poems. They were a hurricane that went through him. In 4 days, he wrote, about 30 sonnets. And then he stopped for a day, and then he began writing on the long poems, and he wrote another bunch of them. And we're talking 150-line poems. And he finished 4 or 5 more of those. And then he wrote a book of prose in the voice of a young worker. And then he kind of took a day off, and then he started writing sonnets again. And he wrote another 30 or so sonnets. Altogether, the ones that were published, 55 sonnets, plus the Duino Elegies, 10 long poems. He finished the last one of those as his last work of that week, and it was still February. In 1 month, 3 books, 2 of them, the Duino Elegies and the Sonnets to Orpheus, without any question, 2 of the most important books of poetry in the 20th century. I was very fortunate. I had good teachers at the University of Illinois. My German teachers were extraordinary. John Frederick Nims, later editor of poetry, assigned us in one of his creative writing classes the 6th sonnet to Orpheus by Rilke. I'd never heard of him, but I was taking a German poetry course at the same time. Just at the right moment, they came together, and I began translating. So that's 1963, I think. And I'm a pack rat, so I still have the original version of that sonnet. I've worked on them. They've been translated many times, but usually because they're sonnets. They're extraordinarily complicated. They are not traditional sonnets, but they are musically beautiful. They are rhymed. They are in patterns. So usually the people who are stressing the intellectual or the emotional part of it abandon the music. And so, for example, the poems start out very simply, Da stieg ein Baum, there rose a tree. And the best translator of our generation, Stephen Mitchell, translated that a tree transcends. No, that's totally wrong. I mean, I love his work, but that's wrong. It's so simple. There rose a tree. Transcends is much too big a word. So I tried to make the music, and I tried to keep the language intact. I kept the form intact, and it took 50 years. I edited a very important magazine, the Beloit Poetry Journal, with others, of course, for 35, 40 years. And we would get hundreds of review copies because we reviewed poetry. And many of them are just, the poetry might be good, but the books are garbage. They're paperback. The paper is cheap. It's lousy. The ink is lousy. The covers are lousy. The distribution mechanisms are lousy. Sorry, we ought to do better than that. My son-in-law is German-Iranian. My daughter's first language is German. So when we were done, I had them proof it, and my son-in-law found 5 mistakes in the German. I read his version, and I found 3 more mistakes, and then my daughter found 2 more mistakes, and then we found no more mistakes. So we've published 3 books in this Covered Bridge Press, and so far no one has found a typo. Editing matters. I have to pay tribute immediately to Angela Werner, who did all the design. And did a beautiful. And the flower that she drew for the cover is about one of the poems. I mentioned that flower on the cover of the book. And it's from the, let's see, 5th sonnet in the 2nd part. And it's just a picture of a flower, and he talks about the flower opening, the way my hand is opening, an anemone, and it opens and opens and stretches itself so far that maybe even at sunset it can't close, right? And he praises that flower. And it's a description, what they call in German a Dinggedicht, a thing poem. Rilke became famous for his thing poems, among other things. And this is a thing poem. And then finally at the end, he says, well, you know, we're a lot stronger and a lot bigger than those flowers. But when? In which of all lives? When will we at last be open, ready to receive? Much to our astonishment, Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance decided to give them a prize. Even to nominate them, I was astonished. And I'll say why, because I can't do it. As soon as I heard about the nomination, I went out and bought the other books that were nominated. It's a beautiful children's book, wonderful book. There you have the author as well. I don't know her. And even more lovely, this one I have to pull back. Can I see it? Yes, The Winter Coast of Maine, right? So I had to go to the ceremony, of course, and got there, and Gibson Fay LeBlanc was there, and he said, yeah, I said, well, it's nice to be here, and then suddenly, of course, it was won. Here is the book itself. Rilke's that important, and the sonnets are that powerful, and they speak to us at a time. Again, before the pandemic, of course, I've been doing this for years, but right now, that sense of what do you do at the end of a pandemic? How do you get out of the darkness that has surrounded us these last couple of years? How do you bring light back into it? And so one of the early poems begins, Rühmen das ist, praising, that's it. So you praise things, and I believe in praising what I can praise. I can curse and I can criticize the people that have endangered our country, but at the same time, I want to be able to say, I praise those who are worthy of praise. And it's not me saying that, it's Rilke saying that. Would you like me to read one or part of one?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, then let me go back to the one I mentioned, because it does matter to me. See if I can find it quickly. It's strangely, it's the first one he wrote when he started again. Remember, he wrote 30 plus, and then he stopped and wrote some other things, and then he wrote the rest of them. And this was the first one he wrote. So I did a little bit of it in English. Let me do it, part of it in German. And one of the things you'll hear here is the extraordinary complexity. Many of you know this and know of this in German. So that at one point he's going to say, die weit zurückgeschnellten Blätterrande dir zurückzugeben, which is, let me see, 4 words, 17 syllables. 4 words, 17 syllables. It's impossible to translate that. We don't do that in English, but here we go. Blumenmuskel, der Anemone Wiesenmorgen nach und nach erschließt, bis in ihren Schoß das polyphone Licht der lauten Himmel sich ergießt, in den stillen Blütenstern gespannte Muskel des unendlichen Empfangs, manchmal so von Fülle übermannte, dass der Ruhrwink des Untergangs kaum vermag, die weit zurückgeschnellten Blätterrande dir zurückzugeben. Du, Entschluss und Kraft von wie viel Welten. Wir gewaltsamen, wir wären länger, aber wann, in welchen alle leben, sind wir endlich offen und der Empfänger. So again, I read part of it, but I'll come back to it. Flower muscle that unlocks the night and opens the anemone's meadow morning step by step until the polyphonic light of the loud skies pours into her lap. stretched into the quiet blossom star, muscle of endless openness, sometimes so overwhelmed by fullness that the sleepy wink of sunset barely can retrieve for you the petal's tips sprung far and flee and free. You of how many worlds, the will and strength. We, with our powers, go on at greater length. But when, in which of all lives, when will we at last be open, ready to receive?